रघुकुल भूषण राजा राम,
रघुकुल भूषण राजा राम,
रघुकुल भूषण राजा राम,
रघुकुल भूषण राजा राम।
जय जय राम जानकी राम,
जय जय राम जानकी राम।
श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम,
श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम।
श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम,
श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम।
श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम,
श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम।
श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम,
श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम।
श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम,
श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम।
श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम,
श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम।
जय जय राम जानकी राम,
जय जय राम जानकी राम।
जय जय राम जानकी राम,
जय जय राम जानकी राम।
जानकी राम,
जानकी राम।
जानकी राम।
जानकी राम।
सियावर रामचंद्र की
जय।
पवन सुत हनुमान की
जय।
बोलो भाई सब संतन की
जय।
सद्गुरुनाथ महाराज की जय। राम राम सीता राम राम
राम सीता राम।
राम राम सीता राम
राम राम सीता राम।
राम राम सीता राम
राम राम सीता राम।
पूर्ण काम परम धाम,
पूर्ण काम परम धाम।
पूर्ण काम परम धाम,
पूर्ण काम परम धाम।
राम राम सीता राम,
राम राम सीता राम।
राम राम मधुर नाम,
राम राम मधुर नाम।
राम राम मधुर नाम,
राम राम मधुर नाम।
शंकर मन रमत राम,
शंकर मन रमत राम।
शंकर मन रमत राम,
शंकर मन रमत राम।
भक्तन के जीवन राम,
भक्तन के जीवन राम।
भक्तन के जीवन राम,
भक्तन के जीवन राम।
पूर्ण करत सबके काम,
पूर्ण करत सबके काम।
पूर्ण करत सबके काम,
पूर्ण करत सबके काम।
पूर्ण करत सबके काम,
पूर्ण करत सबके काम।
राम राम सीता राम,
राम राम सीता राम।
राम राम सीता राम। ये सियावर रामचंद्र की
जय।
हरे रामा राम रामा हरे हरे, Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. श्यावर रामचंद्र की जय, राधावर कृष्णचंद्र की जय। जय सिया राम, जय जय सिया राम,
जय सिया राम, जय जय सिया राम,
जय सिया राम, जय जय सिया राम,
जय सिया राम, जय जय सिया राम।
बोलो राम 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 सीताराम,
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 बोलो राम 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 सीताराम।
बोलो राम 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 सीताराम।
जय सिया राम, जय जय सिया राम,
जय सिया राम, जय जय सिया राम,
जय सिया राम, जय जय सिया राम,
जय सिया राम, जय जय सिया राम।
बोलो राम 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 राजा राम,
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 बोलो राम 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 राजा राम।
बोलो राम 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 राजा राम।
Hari Om everyone. Can you all see me and hear me clearly? Okay, good. Is it because of the week of question answers that I find suddenly the number of people there are quite reduced? But in any case, today is the most important, the most festive occasions for every Hindu Vaidika Sanatani out there. Today is a day that is connected with Bhagwan Sri Ramchandra ji. Today is the Chaitra Shukla Navami. So Chaitra Shukla Navami, according to the Indian calendar, indicates that today Bhagwan Sri Ramchandra ji was born. It also happens to be one day that is very favorite to Bhagwan Ramchandra ji himself. I think most of us should design our life like that. He married Sita ji on this day. So his birth anniversary, wedding anniversary, and his coronation as the emperor, the Samrat. He was the 64th in the dynasty of Ikshwakukula. So he was the 64th one that ruled this earth with Ayodhya as their capital. And Saket was his abode, his palace was named as Saket. So today Bhagwan Ramchandra ji came back after having come back from Lanka, having vanquished Ravana, having brought back Sita ji safely. There was the Rajya Pattabhisheka. Pattabhisheka is to coronate, to anoint somebody as the next king. That also happened today. So it is so good for Sita ji, I tell you. All that she has to do is remember one day. Give one gift, one flower, and say, Bhagwan, Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam Yome Bhaktya Prayachati. Whether it is Patra, Pushpa, Phala, Toya, whether it is leaf, whether it is flower, whether it is fruit, whether it is even a glass of water, if given with love, you accept it. And Sita ji has to do that once. It is not like remember 3 days and 3 times and nah, one shot done. That is why across Bharatvarsha you will find several traditions. In most of the major Bhagwan Ramji's temples in Andhra, you will find Andhra, Telangana. In my head, that difference has not yet happened of separating this into 2 states. Andhra Pradesh still somehow remains as one undivided one. So there you will find that Bhagwan Ramchandra ji is celebrated on this particular day with the Rama Kalyana, his marriage to Sita ji. In Ayodhya and several parts of Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, they celebrate it as Janma of Ram Lalla, birth of Bhagwan Sri Ramchandra ji. Then there are places where Bhagwan Ramchandra ji's Pattabhisheka is celebrated. His coronation is celebrated. I think there is one temple, it is on the tip of my tongue. If I remember it, I'll tell you, where Bhagwan Ramchandra ji is worshipped as the king, Raja Ram. And even to this day, the the state police gives guard of honor at the end of the day before they close the temple, because it is to the king, Samrat, Dasharathi, that it is in honor to. So there are several traditions where you see Bhagwan Ramchandra ji being celebrated for his birth, for his wedding, for his coronation on this day. And a very proud day for every Sanatani Hindu out there, that after about close to 600 years, that the Janmasthala of Bhagwan Sri Ramchandra ji has undisputedly come to the hands of the ones it should belong to, the Hindu. The earlier temple was very barbarously destroyed by Babur, and he built a dome on the edifice, on the pillars, on the foundation of that Ramajanma Sthal, where that temple existed. So I remember very distinctly being with Puja Gurudev Swami Chinmayananji, and somebody asking him the day before that Babri Masjid was pulled down, somebody asked him, what about this masjid? So Gurudev's answer, he's known for his quick repartee, quick on his feet kind of and it was a press meet. So his antennas and his alertness must have been on the high. So the answer that he gave, I would cherish it for the rest of my life. He said, who says we are breaking a masjid? All that we are doing is taking our foundation and those 14 pillars. Rest, if the dome stays, it is Allah's grace. I mean, we are not breaking it. We are just taking what belongs to us. That which was built on the top of it, it is their God's wish if it stays or collapses. And needless to say, the very next day, it was down. And this was way back when I was still a very young boy. I didn't expect that the tide would turn to our side, and stalwarts in the courtroom like Parashuramanji, who in his ripe age of 85 plus, he argued in the court very systematically, and then legally now it is ours. And somebody from Ayodhya recently sent me the pictures of the foundation and the ground that has been raised, and now they have to assemble everything, and the temple should be there. If everything goes well, by 2024 it should be there, that Ram Lalla will be consecrated, Prana Pratishtha will be done there. Why is that important? Maybe if we have time, I will touch upon, or I will ask Hari Chaitanya, Brahmachari Hari Chaitanya, to touch upon, or we both will discuss on that particular point at the later point. After the 4 or 5 of you that are attending today, the 4 of you, I'll ask the questions. Today is supposed to be the question answers on the 13th chapter. So let's get to that. So we'll start with the invocation and then we will begin. Today I might add, because Bhagavan Shiva himself has said that chanting this one particular shloka is sufficient enough to chant all the 1,000 names put together of Bhagavan Vishnu. So I will chant that. If you know it, join along, and let's start the day or the evening. सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्तिः 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 गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुः गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुरेव परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः Okay. Before we can get somebody onto the question answers, let me open up. Okay, let's start with Aparna Pateria. हरिओम बेटा, कैसे हो?
हरिओम स्वामी जी, अच्छी हूँ। आप कैसे हैं?
हैप्पी रामनवमी। मैं एकदम बढ़िया हूँ।
ये
Oh, I promised that I would start with Shri Rama Rama Rameti. थोड़ी mute कर लो. Let me start with that. Let me complete that. Shri Rama Rama Rameti Rame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tattulyam Rama Nama Varanane. Thank you, Siddharth, for reminding. What would I have done without you, man? Thank you. Okay. So happy Ramnami to you.
हैप्पी रामनवमी।
हार्ड क्वेश्चन पूछूं कि इजी क्वेश्चन पूछूं?
एनीथिंग स्वामी जी।
वेरी गुड। The question is, the identity of ashrama and duties ordained by dharma arise because of the Vijnanamaya Kosha, the intellectual sheath. When is it responsible to relinquish my reliance on the Vijnanamaya Kosha?
So the identity of ashrama, or the conviction that I must fulfill the duties that are prescribed by the identity of ashrama, has to be fulfilled. And then when I have fulfilled those duties, then it is appropriate for me to relinquish that identification with the intellect. But until I've finished those duties, I cannot do so.
So net result is that it looks like you can never ever.
Oh, I didn't think of that.
So I have another twist to this question. I'll add a twist to this question, furthermore twist to it, because it is something which you have not thought. Maybe it will give you more depth to think about. For a realized person, is there a possibility of the Vijnanamaya Kosha to exist? Should it exist?
The Vijnanamaya Kosha exists, but there's no identification with it. Okay, I think I understand where this question is going. So in sannyas ashrama, it's okay, because I have done all the other duties of the other ashramas, and now my primary duty in sannyas ashrama would be to let go of that reliance. But a realized master has no identification with the intellect, but because the intellect has to work, like the intellect has to function, but the intellect does not have the ignorance of I am the body, I am the mind, I am the intellect. The intellect has the knowledge of I am Brahman. So a realized master is not a realized master cannot say like I, the person, am realized. The realized master just knows I am Brahman, but the intellect still exists and is no longer ignorant. And that only happens in sannyasa ashrama.
Okay. I may have few things to pick on, but I'll allow Brahmachari Hari Chaitanya to first respond.
Hari Om, happy Ram Navami to everybody.
Happy Ram Navami.
So the question being, when is it responsible to relinquish my reliance on the Vijnanamaya Kosha, specifically with the duties of ashrama that's given? I don't mean to sound like a troll with the answer to this, but if I even get the question in my mind that is it responsible for me to leave these duties, that means I'm not ready to leave it then. That's even born by desire of I'm tired of the duties I have to go through, or some kind of agitation in the mind. Now, when is it responsible? Like Aparna pointed out, when it comes to that sannyasa ashrama, that's when they relinquish all of these duties that a brahmachari or grihastha has to have. Now, as far as it comes to when is it responsible, that's given by the guru, which is why in our sampradaya, not just Chinmaya mission, but you look at different sampradayas, there's that period before sannyas in many of these sampradayas where, like the status of a brahmachari in that realm, where it's to work on the vasanas, to make sure that working on desires, exhausting vasanas in a healthy way, all of this process of duties, everything is done so that to get, when that sannyasa is given, that person is ready at that point. Which is why it's funny when people, Swamiji has touched upon this often, that people say, you know, when are you getting promoted to sannyasa? First of all, there's so many things wrong with that statement right there. First of all, it's not a promotion, it's letting go of this ego attachment. Second of all, there's no time frame. It's subjective, and only the guru is the one that can say this person is ready or not ready. Therefore, when this question comes to mind of how long of this duty, whether it's in grihastha ashrama or it's in brahmacharya, simply that question popping into my mind is a red flag that I'm not ready to renounce all of that. If there is any agitation, that means I must cleanse my mind by doing these duties.
Fair enough. You have touched upon those things which I would have wanted to touch on. So thank you. Thank you both. That was a kind of a twist in the tail, kind of yeah, it was a curveball or a googly in cricket. So yeah, but very well handled by both of you. Thank you. So the next one that I would invite is Hemant Ramchandran. Hari Om Hemant. Happy Ram Navami.
Happy Ram Navami.
Which would you like to celebrate? Janma, Kalyana, or Pattabhisheka? If given a choice of picking one of them.
Oh, that's a tough one. Fine, for the sake of one, Kalyana.
Kalyana, Samuel, Sadam.
Shadam.
So that food of Kalyana, that is. Have you seen the movie called Maya Bazar?
Once upon a time.
You should go see that particular song, Kalyana Samuel Sadam.
I heard it once, yeah. I remember it.
Okay. Now my next question to you is, when I sense anxiety or stress arising, what roles do the mind and intellect play? How do we manage both to resolve anxiety and stress?
So, as per the BMI chart, I remember it's MFE and ITT, which means mind, feels, emotions, and intellect thinks, thoughts. So I guess in order to fully say this, the mind is the one which will be feeling the stress and anxiety, and the mind will go through all the emotions that relate with them, such as anger, sadness, all the negative emotions that come with it. Whereas the intellect will probably, try to find a way of alleviating that stress and anxiety, and will try to think of different ways in order to do that. So like the mind is constantly being agitated and jumping all over, while the intellect is the more rational. So short summary, the mind is acting irrationally while the intellect thinks rationally.
Can there be a situation where there is an intellectual bankruptcy?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the intellect is known to is the reason why we can bring our mind back, but sometimes the intellect may think the wrong thing. So definitely, yeah, there can be intellectual bankruptcy.
Do you remember any specific sequence of logic, whether it is given in Upanishads or Bhagavad Gita, where they talk about this intellectual bankruptcy?
Uh, I'm certain there's a section in Bhagavad Gita, definitely, but I'm not able to remember which one exactly.
If
And
I remind you of it, maybe you will be able to immediately, that one.
yeah,
Dhyato Vishayan Pumsaha Samvritte.
sangaste shopajayate. Yeah,
So the last part of it is Buddhi Nashat.
pranashyati.
Buddhi Nashat Pranashyati. So when there is that bankruptcy that happens, then the individual is certainly doomed. And we get to that point several times in life where intellect is so blanked out, so roughed up, that we are at complete loss. So from there to rebuild, which is what happened to Arjuna. So Divya, you got anything to add? Please step in.
I would say that, the anxiety and stress, especially when it spirals out of control, is when there's an echo chamber between the mind and the intellect. And that's usually because of that misguided intellect that ricochets in a wrong pattern. So, for example, anxiety is just a modified version of fear, right? And when there's an external stimuli, we have a reaction with the emotions, and then to address it, the intellect jumps in. At that point, if the intellect amplifies the anxiety by saying, okay, this fear, oh my gosh, the like the exam, I'm going to be an extreme failure, I'm going to let me run away, let me why do I even care about this exam? Those are the decisions that the intellect makes at that point that is wrong decisions. But then it can ricochet out that then there's this carelessness, there's this selfish motivation. You'll start to see that as an emotion as well. And then you have actions that come out of all of that. And then those actions have consequences. So it's this ricochet that goes from outside stimuli to the mind, to the intellect, back out to the emotions, and then to the external action. So when it comes to resolving this anxiety and stress is when we need that intellect to be educated the right way. Is it able to, like Arjuna, who needed education from Bhagavan Krishna to properly assess the external stimuli, the nature of the mind, and what is a dharmic way of acting? What are the principles I need to start practicing? Then that stress and anxiety is shifted, and it, instead of doing a positive feedback loop, it's a negative feedback loop in the sense that it will calm down to a stable platform.
There is also the other example which comes both in Kathopanishad as well as in Bhagavad Gita, where the body is equated to a chariot, the sense organs to the horse. People usually get confused that they're talking about the very horse and Bhagwan Krishna standing and Arjuna, and equate those 4 horses that Bhagwan was riding to the 5 sense organs, and it doesn't match. The examples are different from the very ratha that they were driving. So there, the body is the ratha, the sense organs are the horses, the jiva is the one for who the chariot is being driven, that is the mind. Then the Buddhi is the charioteer who is guiding the horses properly. Now, what happens if the charioteer gets hit? What happens if the mind and intellect completely go haywire? The chariot is bound to be destructive for its own self as well as to everyone around them. So when our system is not in proper condition, then it will completely tumble down. But if the intellect has proper knowledge, viveka, that which discriminatory knowledge, and the mind is right under the discipline of this intellect to be guided, then the system flows in a seamless manner. Otherwise, at every single level, there will be a rupture. Intellect is going in one direction, the mind is going in a completely different direction, so there is a rupture. It can be guilt, it can be remorse, it can be no feel good factor, it can be, the rupture can erupt into so many different kinds. Then the mind, which is indisciplined, with the organs of perception or actions going in completely different directions, you know that it is not right, but mind wants it in one direction. The organs of perception, action, based out of their own habitual errors, go into a completely different direction. So it is a permutation of 3 layers going in 3 different directions and constantly rupturing. So imagine it as the plates under the surface of Earth. If there are 3 different plates, all 3 going in 3 different directions, with just one going in one wrong direction, there is a possibility of a tsunami. If all 3 going in 3 different directions, imagine the amount of stress, the tsunami inside, the anxieties inside will be that much more draining. So all 3 of these equipments have to be in sync and constantly trained. Thank you both. Now the next question will be to Pranav Varanasi.
Hari Om Swamiji.
Hari Om. A seemingly easy question, but a very difficult thing to practice. So let me ask you that. How do I decipher whether I am functioning objectively and thinking rationally or giving into my emotions?
So my answer is that to start with, the mind is defined as just, a simple flow of thoughts where if you think of it as a river, we just take in our experiences and stimuli from the organs of perception and action and just continually process them. And what happens is if we're giving into our emotions, we are getting ourselves stuck in this flow of thoughts where we are consistently evaluating each new experience and, as Divyaji was saying earlier, fear that comes into our head. And to overcome this and get to a point where we are not enslaved in this flow of thoughts and can actually think rationally, we need to use the intellect and accumulate the experiences that we get and rely on our past knowledge to make a clear and decisive judgment on which thoughts to actually interact with and also what behavior to actually follow that best serves our purposes in a positive way.
Hari?
One point I would add is, and this has helped me personally even, that when I want to decipher between am I thinking or am I worrying, one way of looking at it is how much am I thinking about the past and how much am I thinking about the future in that situation? Not saying that if I'm planning for the future, that's emotional and that's not rational. That's not what I'm saying at all. But when I overly spend time on the past or the future, it's because there's some regret that I'm going by, and that's coloring my thought process, or some anxiety is also coloring that thought process. So when looking even at the future or learning from the past, if that's a burden on me and it creates some kind of fear in me, then I know for sure that I'm looking through the lens of emotions and not rationality. Recently, I was speaking to Swamiji, and I was saying, starting off my sentence by saying, Swamiji, I know this fear is irrational, but, and I was going to go on, he stopped me right there. He said, Hari, fear in itself is irrational. There's no such thing as a rational fear, but go ahead with your point. And I said, Swamiji, I have no point at this point. So anytime I catch myself at, the early onset saying that fear is where I'm operating from, of course that's emotion, but I have to decipher, am I thinking or am I worrying? Because they look very, very similar, but the effects of it and the turmoil that I put myself through, not going through, putting myself through, is a lot at that moment.
The easy test to understand whether I am truly thinking or worrying is the basic input is common to both of them, of the external stimulus, of the past knowledge or data or wisdom. In the pattern of worrying, you keep repeating the situation goal, like, you keep going round and round and round, and you don't see a point, a focus. I had heard this from kids long time ago, Balvihar kids. What did the pencil say to the sharpener? Stop going round and round and round, come to the point. So we never come to the point. We keep going in circles with repeating the same question again and again and again. But why? But why? But why? We'll be whiling away just in that why. But for somebody who wants to look in to proper way of thinking, instead of wasting the time after assessing that this is what is happening, instead of asking the question, why is this happening? They drop the why. This is happening. How do I address this? What are the possible solutions? What are the things that I need to acquire? What are the things that I have to line up? And how do I handle it now? How do I take care of a situation where if this arises again, that I can handle it effectively, or to even make sure that it doesn't happen, that it takes me by surprise. So people who think about solutions and work towards solutions, that is called thinking. But when you are repetitively going into that cycle of why me, why now, why not others, why only me, these patterns, there are absolutely no answers for it, but we get caught up in that. So that is when we are being lost, and it grips us as fear, anxiety, uncertainty, and various shades of it, right? Thank you both.
Thank you, Swami.
Yeah. Now, the next question is to Siddhartha.
Prem Swamiji. Bhavana Swamiji.
Happy Ramani.
Ramanavami Shubhakankshana.
So the question to you is, since vasanas are developed over many lifetimes, do we drop all the 5 koshas, or does the bliss sheath which holds or expresses as our vasanas continue to the next life?
So this was based off the question I had asked last week, Swamiji, to you, and Swamiji had answered that it is the vasanas are at the Anandamaya Kosha, and whatever of those that need to be expressed, whatever is the prarabdha that needs to go through, will express in the other koshas during a specific jiva time as that jiva. And for the next life, then that is still carried forth, that layer of the Anandamaya kosha. The vasanas are still there because that is what brings us back for Punarjanma. And so that will be there until that is renounced, until that is all burnt away. Then that will still continue from one janma to the next.
Divya, can you add technicality to it?
Sure. What came into my mind is the 3 types of karma that we perform. The prarabdha, as Siddharth mentioned, is the vasanas that are expressing right now for this body, and that body includes all of these 5 koshas. But when that prarabdha is exhausted at the end of this lifetime, we now have to remember that there's also sanchita karma and agami karma. Agami, as a simple way of thinking about it, I think of agami karma as the inputs to the storehouse. My storehouse is called sanchita, and output is my prarabdha. So in this lifetime, when I act on those vasanas with this egocentric desire, I'm creating more and more results that have to fructify later. That adds to my storehouse. So sanchita karma remains as the umbrella under which all of my lifetimes will happen. And each time a birth is taken, a packet from that sanchita karma turns as prarabdha karma and expresses as this current package of 5 koshas. So the 5 koshas are like packed up, exhausted, and now I have to go back into sanchita karma, get my next set of, koshas for my next body. So yes, the koshas are dropped, but the continuity comes from my sanchita karma. Sonuji, I hope that was the technicality that is appropriate here.
Let me pull in Hari also and see what else he can add.
Simply reiterating that point that one kosha cannot stand alone like this. For an expression, there must be koshas that it expresses through. So at the Vijnanamaya kosha, where the thoughts develop, there has to be a desire that has to arise even in the form of a thought that I want XYZ. Therefore, it has to be there. For that thought to manifest as some kind of action, an Annamaya kosha is needed without using that gross body to accomplish that task. Because karma has 4 uses that it can accomplish, whether it's creating something, whether it's purifying something, modifying something. Whatever it is that the karmas can do, I have to have that body to do that. Therefore, to think that one of these koshas will drop or a few of them will drop and only a few of them remain, that's not how it works. Because if there's any avidya at all, that ignorance has to be expressing as that Anandamaya kosha, and therefore all of these other ones have to exist verily. And like Siddharth pointed out, specific yoni to exhaust these specific vasanas that are specific for that jiva, that's also part of the technicality that's very, very necessary.
So sanchita is like the bag where everything in the past, from the past lives that we have done, everything gets collected. You speak Telugu, so you know sanchi. Sanchi means a bag. So everything is bagged in it. That which is the most appropriate, that is released as a batch, that becomes your prarabdha for this life. And through the actions, reactions, possibilities of how you respond to each situation, you are creating more of vasanas, then it goes into the same pile. But from that pile, depending on how you act, react, respond, you are architecting, you're creating an architectural blueprint for your next life. That becomes your agami, that which is yet to come. So you're designing it now. Every act that you do, Whether you're using your time, not using your time, abusing your time, indulging in it, or being judicious about it, every single minute detail goes into designing that. How do you want it? Do you design a house which doesn't have a roof, leaks? See, I have lived in houses where the roof would leak because it was poorly constructed or it had cracks in it. A very cheap build or whatever you call it. So night times we would have, when it is raining, we would have bucket somewhere, mug somewhere, different sizes of vessels to collect that water so that it doesn't spread around. Even to these $1 million house where you have these facilities and everything built in, they also seem to leak. Now, do you want to construct a house which is leak proof, weather proof, efficient, or efficiency is to use that body, mind, and intellect to get out of this system? Or do you want to construct it where it takes you further and further, enticing you and catching you every turn into a wrong frictional kind? So that you have to design from now. That is where freedom of choice comes into picture. Hope the entire spectrum is clear.
Yes, Swamiji, thank you.
Okay, Hari, stay put. I have a question for you. Now, whenever I talk about, Bhagwan Sri Ramchandra Ji's Janmasthala, having been born and brought up, growing in India, the impact of it is quite different. How do you see it, having been born and brought up here? How do you understand it? How do you feel about it? And what is your perspective on it?
Thank you. So Swamiji, coming back in October of 2019 from the Brahmacharya training course, I remember this very vividly. November 2nd, that night, we had a lock-in that we were holding for the high school students. So while that overnight lock-in is going on, Swamiji was on his phone, and Swamiji was ecstatic that day. And he told me the Supreme Court of India just passed a verdict that Ram Janmabhoomi can be built in Ayodhya. The Ram Mandir can be built. For the next 3 days, Swamiji was joyous, but also in a state of disbelief. Kept repeating again and again that in my lifetime, I did not think this was possible. Now, the joy was great to see. I understood that there was a controversy for many, many centuries over this. But the fact that Swamiji kept repeating, I never thought would happen in my lifetime, was very curious to me. Because Swamiji is not surprised by too many things, having seen so much. But him for to be absolutely so shocked by this for extended time, wanted me to do more research on this. And what I found really shook me up, and I really understood what was the significance of this event. Imagine a situation where you have a house, an ancestral property that your family has, that for generations, it's owned by one part of the family, but whether it's a summer vacation time, whether during Mahotsavas, different from all over the country, the family comes to visit that area and then they go back. Now, say 1 or 2 generations, they don't value that area, or that ancestral property is taken away, whatever it may be, and they don't visit it. By the 3rd generation, they can't even talk to their grandparents about that area because they haven't been there. Their parents don't know about it, and this generation's never been there either. Therefore, connection to that site is completely gone, out of sight, out of mind at that point. Now imagine a sthala like a temple, that in Sanatana Dharma, as opposed to other religions, it's not the idea that this is just a congregatory area where people come to pray in a group. That's not the only thing. We believe Bhagavan actually resides in this temple. That's why it's such a holy place. The power that it has is because we actually believe Bhagavan resides there. The rituals that are done to make that happen is a very elaborate process. Now imagine a sthala that's so auspicious, it's actually the birthplace of one of the avatars of Bhagavan in our Hindu itihasa. That place is broken down by force. In this verdict that finally allowed Hindus to rebuild that temple came 491 years after that temple was forcibly broken down. In India, with the government that was functioning as an independent country for 70 plus years, and it finally happened now. So that two thoughts that I have I'd like to share. The first being the process that was undergone to make this happen was something very emotional to see and very inspiring as well. Where it was not that we want an ad hoc solution that we can somehow get a temple built. In the future, it may be broken down again, or there are impediments to the building. To avoid all of that, it was a legal system that was gone through. And we see that in any kind of a system, if they go through it with evidence in a legal way, we say Satyam eva jayate. In the Upanishad, it's given. Truth alone prevails. Where any argument that was given, that some arguments were there was no temple in the first place, it was only a mosque. Excuse me, there are markings that prove it's a temple. Archaeological evidence shows that there was a temple in this area. All of that's broken down. The fact that in their legal proceedings, they actually gave Ram Lalla, Bhagavan Shri Ramchandra Ji, the status of a person. That deity got the status of a person, saying establishing personhood, therefore that sthala has to be maintained as well. So the genius of proving these points was undertaken with great care, and people actually spent lifetime, their entire lifetime, fighting for this cause. Some of them, unfortunately, worked for decades to make this happen with their expertise, never lived to see this verdict come down, and did not live, obviously, to see this temple be built. And the final thought that I had was, I wanted to see, how does this fit into Puja Gurudev's vision? Because oftentimes in our mission centers, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and we learn about Puranas, Itihasas, but where is that activism element? Is that a part of our mission or not? I always questioned that as I was growing up. I read an interview of Puja Gurudev's. I suggest all of you do the same. It's by Ram Madhav, who was a journalist at the time, and he interviewed Puja Gurudev in 1992, a mere few months before he attained Mahasamadhi, on this Ayodhya issue. And in there, Puja Gurudev unequivocally says, we need to have a temple built there. And as Swamiji said, unabashed about saying it, he gives the reasons why. And any question the journalist comes up with, saying that this will lead to communal violence, this will lead to snuffing out of minorities, whatever issues he laid out, Puja Gurudev logically, with great love, great clarity, points out why this is a necessity, why it's not harming anyone, why this has to happen. So much so that in his lifetime, even 1984, there's an interview that he does in an Australian university called Deakin University. The video's on YouTube. If you look at the very beginning of that video where they introduce Puja Gurudev, the screen has his picture and it says Hindu saint and activist. That at that time in his life, the world recognized him as a champion for the Hindu cause. And learning about Ram Janmabhoomi, the controversy, the triumph, what the Hindu people had to go through, understanding Puja Gurudev's role in making this happen as well, I could not be more proud. So being born and raised in this country, I was insulated from a lot of it. And misinformation was quite frequent from the mass media, from academia, all these different sources. But going to the source and seeing that Puja Gurudev's vision was even imprinted on what Ram Janmabhoomi should be, that was a very inspirational thing, Swamiji.
Since we have the luxury of time, another 5 to 6 minutes, reading the popular books, the popular media, where one of the thought lines that is often seen is, all of this happened because being a Hindu makes you weak. Being a Hindu, you couldn't protect your own places. Being a Hindu, you're a pacifist, that anybody can walk over all over you, and you're just nothing but a doormat. That is how it is presented, that for ages, first there were 7 different lineages of the Islamic origin, all the way up unto the Mughals. Then came the British. Prior to that, the Europeans, there were French, Dutch, Portuguese as well. So for about 800 years, it's a subjugated environment. Was there a resistance? Was there any kind of a uproar about it any time in history?
There definitely was a resistance. Whether it was when the barbaric Islamic invasions were going on or opportunistic Christian crusaders as well, there was always a resistance. And if we look back in time of even when there was conflict in Bharatavarsha between kingdoms, much before these invasions even took place, it was never on a whim to simply conquer over someone. It was because they found a dharma in some other kingdom, saying that's why war has to happen. Even when it happened, it was always with dharma yuddha, not kuta yuddha. In dharma yuddha, there were so many rules that were set in place. Someone that's unarmed, you don't fight them. Interestingly, someone that does not have a male heir to take over the family, you don't kill that person in battle. Why are you harming that person's family in what this war is if it's between two armies? So to devolve from that state, when invaders came in, it wasn't that they never played by rules. There was not a dharmic war going on. It was simply expansion and to cause as much mayhem and destruction as possible. And even in those circumstances, there was great resistance by great Hindu heroes. So if there are sources to look at for that, Swamiji, that I've seen in my rudimentary understanding so far of these resistances to these invasions, then there's one book I'd say by Sandeep Balakrishna called 10 Heroic Moments, I believe is what it's called in Hindu history. And these are names I'd never heard of. We know the famous names, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, Jhalsi Rani, these other names, but there were many in there, Krishna Devaraya, other kings and even queens who fought against these invasions that really is inspiring and shows us that the narrative that Hindus were just doormats, and this idea of ahimsa that's been twisted so often to put it in a light of just turning the other cheek and letting us be walked over. That's not what ahimsa is. Ahimsa is that non-violence, but rising when necessary, when dharma is at stake. So looking at these sources, that's really opened my eyes as well.
So in and through these many years, definitely there has been a very resilient kings and queens that have laid down their lives. And when they were captured by the then rulers who controlled that area, it was not even an easy death for them, where their eyes were gouged out, their skins were peeled down and left to they were stuck with a spear to be eaten by. I mean, it's painful, but our ancestors definitely deserve a worthy moment of our life where we pause and thank them profusely. If they were not resisting, if they were not standing up, if they were not in a cohesive manner trying to re-establish, trying to get back that which is verily their own roots, we would not have had today this opportunity to sit down and discuss across the US and discuss on the basic tenets of Hinduism and its application through a book called Self-Unfoldment. We would have been probably a mark in the history where we would have been told that like the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Greek, the Roman, there was a community called Hindu also. And that's about it. Left for the museums. But today, if we are a thriving population with about 80+% still being Hindu, whether you rigorously practice it or not is a questionable thing. But still, you are that. We have nothing but our gratitude to our ancestors. And after about 600 years of that tapas, where many people have very happily laid their lives down so that you and I can cherish being a Hindu, connecting to our roots. So to all of their sacrifices, to all of their tapas, I think this is a mark of an amazing moment of triumph for the Sanatana Dharma to reconnect with its roots and re-establish. I mean, your generation is definitely blessed that in 2 years, when the temple is done and ready, you can be the valid part to support, to prosperously take care of it. So that responsibility would come on these generations, that for which our ancestors have truly fought for. So on this Ramanavami, I think it is good to know, recognize, and understand this aspect. So I'll stop there. There are many other salient features that have to be touched upon, but I think this much is a good beginning, a good start. Hari, since you're already there, can you take over and chant Hanuman Chalisa for us?
Yes, Swamiji, 1 second. Shri Guru Charana Saroj Raja Nij Mana Mukura Sudhari Baranau Raghubara Bimala Jasu Jodayak Phalachari Buddhihina Tanu Janike Sumiro Pavana Kumara Bala Buddhi Vidya Dehu Mohi हरहु कलेस विकार जय हनुमान ज्ञान गुण सागर जय कपीसतिहु लोक उजागर रामदूत अतुलित बल धामा अंजनी पुत्र पवन सुत नामा महावीर विक्रम बजरंगी कुमति निवार सुमति के संगी कंचन बरण विराज सुबेसा कानन कुंडल कुंचित केसा हाथ वज्र और ध्वजा बिराजे कांधे मूंज जनेऊ साजे शंकर सुवन केसरी नंदन तेज प्रताप महाजगबंदन विद्यावान गुणी अति चातुर राम काज करिबे को आतुर प्रभु चरित्र सुनिबे को रसिया राम लखन सीता मन बसिया सूक्ष्म रूप धरि सियहि दिखावा विकट रूप धरि लंक जरावा भीम रूप धरि असुर संहारे रामचंद्र के काज संवारे लाय संजीवन लखन जियाए श्री रघुबीर हरषि उर लाए रघुपति कीन्ही बहुत बढ़ाए तुम मम प्रिय भरत ही सम भाई सहस बदन तुम्हरो यस गावे अस कहीं श्रीपति कंठ लगावे सनकादिक ब्रह्मादि मुनीसा नारद सारद सहित अहिंसा चमकुबेर दिगपाल जहाते कवि कोविद कहि सके कहाते तुम उपकार सुग्रीव ही कीन्हा राम मिलाय राजपद दीन्हा तुम्हरो मंत्र विभीषण माना लंकेश्वर भय सब जग जाना जुग सहस्र जो जन पर भानु लील्यो ताहि मधुर फल जानु प्रभु मुद्रिका मेली मुख माहि चल धिलांघि गए अचर जनाहि दुर्गम काज जगत के जेते सुगम अनुग्रह तुम्हरे तेते राम दुआरे तुम रखवारे होतन आज्ञा बिनु पैसारे सब सुख लहे तुम्हारे सरना तुम रक्षक काहू को डरना आपन तेज सम्हारो आप तीनों लोक हांकते कांपे भूत पिशाच निकट नहीं आवे महावीर जब नाम सुनावे नासे रोग हरे सब पीरा जपत निरंतर हनुमत बीरा संकट ते हनुमान छुड़ावे मन क्रम बचन ध्यान जो लावे सब पर राम तपस्वी राजा तिनके काज सकल तुम साजा और मनोरथ जो कोई लावे, सोई अमित जीवन फल पावे। चारों जुग पर ताप तुम्हारा, है पर सिद्ध जगत उजियारा। साधु संत के तुम रखवारे, असुर निकंदन राम दुलारे। अष्ट सिद्धि नौ निधि के दाता, असबर दीन जानकी माता। राम रसायन तुम्हारे पासा, सदा रहो रघुपति के दासा। तुम्हारे भजन राम को पावे, जन्म जन्म के दुख बिसरावे। अंत काल रघुबर पुर जाय, जहाँ जन्म हरि भक्त कहाय। और देवता चित्तन धरई, हनुमत से सर्व सुख करई। संकट कटे मिटे सब पीरा, जो सुमिरै हनुमत बलबीरा। जय 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 हनुमान गोसाई, कृपा करहु गुरुदेव की नाई। जो सत बार पाठ कर कोई, छूट ही बंदी महा सुख होई। जो यह पढ़े हनुमान चालीसा, होय सिद्धि साखी गौरीसा। तुलसीदास सदा हरि चेरा, की जय नाथ हृदय मह डेरा। की जय नाथ हृदय मह डेरा। पवन तनय संकट हरण, मंगल मूर्ति रूप। राम लखन सीता सहित, हृदय बसहु सुर भूप। सियावर रामचंद्र की जय, पवन सुत हनुमान की जय। उमापति महादेव की जय, बोलो भाई सब संतन की जय। श्री सद्गुरुनाथ महाराज की
Jai. Thank you so much, Hari. It was good. If I think somebody who is born and brought up here can understand this, you would be shocked, not just surprised, shocked that many being born and brought up in India itself were insulated and did not know all these details which we just touched upon. It's like a mountain to read. But the two quick references is posted here if you want to click on it to save it in the chat on Zoom. And those of you who are watching it on YouTube live, in the chat I have posted it, and also in the description box I have added these two links for you to be able to click. So it is down in the description box. So if you want to check out the YouTube video where Gurudev is initially talking about, and the second one is the interview with the press where Gurudev is talking about the validity of this Rama Janmabhoomi and why it is a need. So please do check it out. We'll conclude with the Shanti Patha. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet, Asato Ma Satkamaya, Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate, Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Happy Ramanavami again to all of you. May you research more, understand more, and be a proud Hindu.